And so the question was, who was the right customer there? And at that point, we were able to articulate that we are the most flexible tool in the market and the most powerful tool on the market. And ease of use is that's obviously something that we want to have available. The traditional thing of make easy things easy and hard things possible. And we just wanted the ceiling to be really high. So for that, we realized that growth marketers are really the most able to understand this idea and have that kind of ability of trying out different things.
Welcome to the Startup Field Guide, where we learn from successful founders of high growth startups how their companies truly found product market fit. I'm your host, Sandhya Hegde, and today we'll be diving into the story of Clay. So, Clay is an AI powered platform for sales prospecting that gathers data from over 75 sources now, whether that's lead databases, LinkedIn, etc., to build lists and help sales teams send personalized outreach messages. So, just valued at $500 million, Clay has a few thousand customers already, including go to market teams at Intercom, Ramp, Notion, Anthropic, Workada, Vanta, and more. Joining us today is Kareem Amin, co founder and CEO of Clay. Welcome to the Field Guide, Kareem.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I'd actually love to talk a little bit about your previous experience starting Frame in 2011. I think this was your first time being a founder. I'm curious what that experience was like and how it informed, how that acquisition informed kind of your later decision to start Clay.
Yeah, totally. So some background is that I grew up in Egypt and moved to go to college in Montreal and McGill. And after college, I kind of had the option of either doing grad school in neuroscience, which was what I was super interested in. And I had also been kind of programming all my life. And so I chose to go to Microsoft for a little bit, make some money, immigrate, and also kind of figure out what I want to do if I want to go back to grad school or not. At that time, I found this program called Techstars in Seattle, which
Hmm.
was kind of up and coming as a kind of like head to head with YC. And I think they just shut down the Seattle program actually, but it's competitive at the time and like really good. And it made sense for us to go to it because we were in Seattle instead of moving. And so my co-founder Nikolai and I, who was a really close friend of mine in college, who also joined me at Microsoft, both of us decided to leave Microsoft and go to Techstars to start a company because we had been ideating with a bunch of different things. And that's kind of how we came to Frame, which was our second idea, not our first one. And the idea with Frame was really taking a look at what was happening in the moment and what had changed. And the iPad had just come out. And we noticed that people were using it to shop. And one of the top places to shop was Shopify, all of the Shopify stores. And
Right.
we made it so that all these Shopify stores would look great on an iPad automatically. So we made a Shopify app essentially that really showed us a couple of things. One, the power of a distribution network. So we got a lot of reviews and we would make sure that people reviewed it and made it go to the top of the store. And so that would get more people to see it. And I think it got to a point where maybe like a large percentage or a relatively large percentage of the stores would install our app. And I think at the time we got a call from Shopify being like, "What are you guys doing to our product? Taking it over." So yeah, it wasn't a very long kind of entrepreneurship experience. We ran the company for about a year and we were working out of another company's office in New York. They were growing really quickly and about to raise their Series B, and they wanted to enter to their to e-commerce clients, and they thought we were a good way to do that. And so they acquired the company, and we joined as the 30th and 31st employees to kind of help scale their product and engineering.
Got it. And what was the driver behind kind of choosing acquisition rather than continuing to build Frame?
I think it's the usual driver where you decide what will grow faster. At the time, we hadn't raised a ton of funding, and partially that's because Seattle is a harder place to raise money than New York or San Francisco, and we didn't fully appreciate that. And the other thing was feeling like we were in the right place. Like the person who was in this company went to the same university as us. We were seeing them close all these deals. We also weren't sure about it, I would say. So, in particular, I think my co-founder Nikolai was a bit more hesitant than me, and we were kind of going back and forth on it.
Got it.
And eventually, we thought that we could they like sell this product from inside and actually see also like what a super fast growing startup would look like. And looking back on it, I think that we should have just continued what we were building. We had product market fit and we had a ton of things that we could build. And we didn't kind of have enough people tell us like, oh yeah, you can do this. Don't worry about it. Keep going.
Right.
Um,
Right.
so that was a good thing to learn and help. I actually think when we raised from first round for Clay, they actually asked us like, what would make you like, why would you continue this time instead of
Right.
sell early? And I was like, well, the experience of selling early last time.
Right. Yeah, and the Shopify ecosystem continued to grow massively, so you would have continued to benefit from that too, hindsight 2020.
Right.
Um,
Right. We were early there.
in some way, I feel like you were already aligned with your future Clay vision. You were helping small businesses look good on iPad and grow. I'm curious, like when you, in 2017, like how did you decide, okay, what is the mission behind the company? What is the universe or subset of idea universe that we are going to explore with Clay? And who do I want to do it with? Like, what was some of your thinking when you started Clay?
Yeah, of course. So, well, I started Clay with my co-founder Nikolai, same
Right.
person from before, who was one of my closest friends. And the thing that we had been kind of ideating on, and to that point, we had kind of both been working together in various capacities, whether in this company or the company that acquired us, or like and we built many things. And we also had context of working in the company that had acquired us, sail through of like some of the needs within an organization. And we had both been thinking about like how do we give the power of programming to an order of magnitude more people? Partially because we were product people who were engineers, and so we were building a lot of product. But also we thought about it in terms of access. So in the 21st century, if you can get machines to do what you want, right? You have tons of leverage and you can create a ton of value and wealth. And so if you can't do that, you really are locked into having ideas but not being able to materialize them. And so we got really excited by this and we tried many different ways of making that happen. So the idea was abstract, but it had tons of manifestations that were concrete. And the current version of Clay was something that, right as we were starting, we kind of started to think, oh, the spreadsheet is the world's most popular programming environment, but it's not connected to data on the internet. And what would be possible if we did that?
Right. Right. And you ended up staying super lean and raised another round 2 years later in 2019, but you still hadn't quite picked the direction or the product that like people see Clay as today. I'm curious, like, what your approach was at the time. How did you think about why are you raising funding? What's the direction you want to go in? What's the story for investors? How did all that play out in 2019?
Yeah, I think it's always good to have the context of what was happening at the time, right? So at the time, the it's similar to how AI is every company is adding like now they are the AI powered X, right? It
Right.
was no code at that time. And we were really well positioned to be kind of like the market or one of the companies that seemed like it had the potential to be the market leader in no code tooling because we were the spreadsheet where you can um, pull data from anywhere and
Right.
create all of these workflows, and the product was very horizontal at the time. And even then we had a ton of ideas about how to use it for go to market, but we hadn't committed to that direction yet. We were exploring lots of different ways and lots of
Right.
different roles. I mean, recruiting is a type of sales, right? So
Right.
should you focus on that? Should we allow people to build? Lots of people wanted to use it as what we were calling a higher order database, right? So it's a database that understands types outside of just text and numbers, and
Right.
they were using it to build all kinds of lists or to use it as kind of like a backend for some of their projects. So we had lots of people pulling us in different directions, or lots of users, and we were trying to come up with a framework of how to pick. And the framework can be internal, like what is meaningful to you and what are you best situated to do and what do you care about? And it can also be external. What do people want? What is a big opportunity? Where are you being pulled in the market? And
Right.
making those two fit is quite the puzzle.
Right. Right. And we know you eventually picked sales and outbounding as kind of one thing to focus on. Actually, I really loved your interview with Todd from First Round Capital. So, everyone listening to this, please go find that as well. And it's on my favorite topic, which is finding product market fit. And Kareem talks a lot about this process of finding your ICP in that interview, which I think is an extremely honest and extremely helpful to us founders who are aspiring towards the same goal. So eventually you picked sales, but I'm curious, like, to your best recollection, what was your stated strategy in 2019 when you were fundraising, if you remember now?
Yeah, I think it's good to add to the best of your recollection. Hindsight changes the story. But well, and when we were kind of raising, but so all of our fundraising after that had been after the seed round had been preemptive, so we weren't out kind of with a deck trying to
Okay,
tell a specific story. We were, and I generally think of fundraising as a breadth first search. You find a believer, you don't
right,
convince someone. So you find someone who's already excited about what you're doing and they happen to find you. And that's kind of what we found. Like, it was a very powerful programmable interface that the model of like what we had built, like kind of
right,
appealed to our investors as well as to customers. And even from then, a lot of times people look at Clay and they feel one of the reactions is like, this is magic or like, this is so powerful. And the reason that I think that happens is because we infused this with that. Like that was one of our intentions building it is, and it's one of the things that we thought was cool, right? Like you can pull data from anywhere and it suddenly pops up
right.
into your spreadsheet and you can connect it to other tools. And so that feeling was always there. And we tried to keep that going. So I think there's lots of different ways to fundraise. One of them is a really powerful demo where you make them feel something like this is interesting. And you might
Right.
not be able to pinpoint exactly how all the pieces fit, but
Right.
you know that something about the way the product is architected gives you the sense of power, right?
Yeah.
Of course,
We
you need a
call it
lot of other things to fit together, but that's one of them.
we call it seeing a glimpse of the future. And yeah, and I can tell like kind of what that felt like, and it didn't have to be necessarily use case focused at the time, but it's the same functionality that drive claim
Right.
now,
Oh,
that
and
drives
we
claim
did
now.
talk
Yeah.
about this use case, right? We did talk
Right.
about
Right.
many of the use cases.
Of
So,
course.
just to make it as people maybe someone's watching this interview and is thinking about how they're building their product, you need to be able to see these use cases. We weren't kind of
Right.
confused about it. The
Right.
question that is more difficult than seeing is choosing,
Right.
right? So you need to have the seeing, which isn't always obvious, but then you also need to pick. And so we talked about the possibility of this use case, and that was also like exciting, but how it actually manifested was also its own journey. And part of just to kind of summarize for you, the path was we built the product, we spent some time exploring and talking internally about like what is one, what do we want to do? And two, kind of what is the thing that is most needed in the market and what can have the biggest outcome. an impact. And my co-founder Nikolai started searching for customers and outbounding and using the product to do outbounding. And when we saw that, we were like, oh, we learned how complex that is to do at the
Right.
moment and how many tools you needed to do and what the quality of the data is. And we were able to formulate a strategy of aggregating all the different data sources and then using that to personalize your messaging. So actually, I was going to say to you, and it, right at the beginning of the interview, that we think of ourselves as a tool for growth. So we don't tend to think of ourselves as like a sales prospecting tool.
Right.
Um, and the difference between that is subtle. But when you think of a tool for growth, if you think of Figma or Photoshop as for designers, Clay is that to growth.
Right.
So we're giving you all, and maybe this will actually connect to some of the other things we'll talk about, but we're giving someone who's creative the ability to execute their ideas in growth really quickly, whether that's in outbound or whether that's converting inbound leads or
Right.
whether that's expanding existing customers or retaining them. We think of all of this as within the mission. Yeah. So that's just
Makes
kind of
sense.
like the framing that allowed us to really commit to this idea and feel excited about it.
Right. And so now this is, I think, around 2020, 21, where you have a much more focused, opinionated product. Within sales, there are a lot of different profiles, right? Like you have sales teams in big companies, you have sales teams in small companies that have like no existing customer base. They are just starting from scratch, similar to where you were at maybe Clay yourself. You have RevOps, you have the affiliated kind of growth people who are not quite SDRs. How deep did you go in terms of like figuring out where to focus? And was it kind of, did you have a intentional focus on smaller customers or smaller teams to begin with? So curious how you thought about kind of market segmentation essentially.
Yeah, that was very hard. So uh, by the end of 2021, we probably like I would say like December, but really like January 2022, uh, we were fully committed to this direction. Um, but we didn't quite have all the pieces in place of the language that we're using to describe who our ICP is. And you're right that is it SDRs or is it RevOps? Or is it growth people on marketing? So the way we went about this was uh, easier to, when I look back at it, it's easier to put the pieces together. But we basically looked at who could use the product today. Ideally, obviously, I think that the process is quite messy and maybe there are really great ways to do it systematically. But for us, we knew that we wanted to give the power of programming and the ability to execute these creative kind of growth ideas. We knew that it required tons of stitching together of products that existed in order to do that. And then we decided that we could go in two directions, right? Like one is be super simple and similar to what you were describing. Like if you want it to be a lead prospecting tool, there's like three buttons that you press and you generate a lead. And that would fit really well with SDRs because they're very busy as well. They need to like hit their quotas. And so it needs to be straightforward and they're usually kind of earlier in their careers. And we could do that, but there are a lot of tools doing that. And that wasn't actually really giving the power of programming or creativity, right? So it didn't really match with what we had built or our intention. So we decided to actually, we tried to get that, like a couple of SDR users realized very quickly that's not the right target customer. And then we had the two options of RevOps and growth. So there's fewer of them. That means that you are targeting, and RevOps usually sits in sales, growth usually sits in marketing. And so the question was, who is the right customer there? And at that point, we were able to articulate that we are the most flexible tool in the market and the most powerful tool on the market. And ease of use is what we make that's obviously something that we want to have available. but the traditional thing of like make easy things easy and hard things possible. And we just wanted the ceiling to be really high. So for that, we realized that growth marketers are really the most able to understand kind of this idea and have that kind of ability of trying out different things.
Right.
RevOps, it really depends on the person and the customer and the company, but often they would like to kind of make different workflows kind of automated. And
Right.
so they usually work well together, but we usually target growth people first and then RevOps.
Got it. Yeah. Because I think with growth marketing, you are tapping into a community that also sees itself as somewhat more technical and wants to lean into this and is kind of looking for opportunities to do so.
Yeah, and absolutely they do that. And we've been very grateful to work with a lot of very creative, very smart growth marketers.
Any early kind of customers, design partners who like gave you feedback that surprised you and helped you shape the product that are memorable?
We initially built a Slack community that we pushed everybody into for support. And
Right.
so, at the time it was a big risk because it's public, everybody is seeing everybody else's feedback. But it actually ended up being really helpful because there were many um, groups of growth marketers and in particular B2B agencies that were well connected to each other that would then ask for features. We would respond really quickly and then they would invite other people that they know because they were kind of getting so much value out of this. And so what we found actually was that a lot of the B2B agencies that were doing kind of uh, SDRs or BDRs as a service or doing growth as a service were really early adopters. They were very sophisticated, sometimes more sophisticated than growth marketers at startups because they were working across many
Right.
different
Right.
clients and they had to service all of them. And so they gave us a ton of feedback that was very effective in improving the product quickly early on.
Got it. And when did you start monetizing Clay?
So we started monetizing in probably December 2021 was when we started doing it more in earnest. And and around we launched the product on Product Hunt in February 2022. And it was kind of the number one of the week and the day and all that. And that kind of gave us some momentum. But really it was probably May 2022 when things really kicked off into gear. Um, and we started having a loop of very good month on over month growth. Uh,
Right.
yeah.
And walk me through kind of how you made those decisions, like when to start monetizing, how much to price, like how much of it was you kind of testing different things out in the early days, or did you start with a pretty clear hypothesis of like, okay, we think this is the right way to monetize Clay?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we started once we kind of picked the segment that we're going to focus on and picked what the initial use case was and really made that concrete. There was a lot of product things that we needed to do, like remove features that weren't necessarily aligned with that, change the text. So a lot of the product remained exactly the same. We just changed the words. We changed the
Right.
marketing
Right.
landing page so that
Right.
it was clear what you were here to do. And even then, people initially struggled a little bit to figure out how to get started. And we had a lot of like early champions that would help other people get started because they saw so much potential once you actually got into understood the mental model. And so the first step was align everything so that everything is targeted towards growth marketing and secondarily RevOps, and then launch the product. Once we did those two things, we then started focusing on monetizing and making sure that grows month over month. We actually have a couple of blog posts on pricing. So we just released our pricing 3.0. We're very transparent about how we do pricing. It's worth giving that a read. to see how it's changed over time. But
Nice.
essentially, we knew that we wanted this is a recurring use case, finding new customers, growing your
Right.
existing customers. So it needs to be a recurring billing. We knew that we wanted to be usage based instead of seat based. The reason we're doing that is that we're not necessarily because we're not selling to SDRs. If you're selling to SDRs, you should make it seat based. And because as you grow, you should have more SDRs. Whereas what we're trying to do is to centralize everything, make it organized how you do your go to market, and potentially have one or two people running that. In addition to kind of your SDRs who change what they're doing from the research and messaging to actually like making the phone calls or following up. And so we knew that it needed to be usage pricing. So those are the kind of
Right.
like two main things that align with the strategy. And then from there, we kind of picked the three buckets that we wanted to start at, looking at our costs, looking at the value of other comparative products, and kind of finding a sweet spot where we're not necessarily for data, we're trying to be one of the cheapest solutions out there, right?
Mhm.
But we have lots of different ways. If you have your own API keys, you could use them in Clay and you don't pay us for data. So we're not trying to kind of optimize that. And we're
Right.
trying to be, I guess, one of the ways that the lenses that we look at it from is the customer's perspective. How do you make it the most customer friendly pricing experience? And the second and third iterations have just done more for that. So our latest iteration is realizing our credits expired. So credits are a way of buying data, and then there's like a platform fee essentially bundled in there. And they used to expire every month. And now we give you up to 2x your monthly allotment that can roll over, as well as the ability to buy credits and top up at any time. And as far as we know, no one else in the market gives you both of these features at the same time.
Right. And it's more flexibility so that your customers can make better decisions how much they want to invest in growth, when they want to pull back. But I think the one important thing I'll call out is this is not just pricing, this is actually engineering. Like you want to be able to make that functionality available. And so I love that you have kind of figured out how to really execute on like customer friendliness, not just in terms of like culture, but the product as well, and
Right.
all the way down to pricing.
And I think that like you make a really great point here, which is we try to be aligned all the way through around our strategy. So we're the most flexible tool in the market and the most powerful
Right.
tool in the market. And so we're also a flexible working culture. We're also a flexible pricing culture, right? So we want to be able to have those kind of values go all the way through the organization. And so that you can feel it in every interaction with the company.
Right. And when did you start building out your team? So if you go back to maybe like early 2022 as things started coalescing, how big was your team then? And when did you start really kind of growing the team? Curious how you thought about like what the right early hires for Claire and especially on the go-to-market side, being a go-to-market and growth-focused company yourself.
Right. Well, I was very lucky in that through a set of really fortunate circumstances, I met Varun, who is our head of ops and also kind of the third co-founder of the company. And he joined around April 2022 and has been leading our go-to-market efforts. And he's been outstanding. And so around that time, we were probably 9 people. Actually, we were probably in April, we were probably 7 or so, but the team that kind of got to the first million in ARR was 11 people. And yeah, so basically we once we started hitting our stride and recognized from the early what changed was we were getting always positive feedback. And then we started getting focused positive feedback. So
Right.
and then we started getting by focusing what we were telling customers we were hearing back from them that yes, this is what you are, and we want this next feature. And all the features made sense as the next step. They
Right.
weren't kind of random. And so once we saw that, we saw also the growth in revenue and the growth in usage all aligning. And we started making sure that we did the next thing as quickly as possible. And so anyone requests anything from us that made sense, we immediately shipped it. And our policy is make it possible, then make it simple, right? So even if it was convoluted how you were going to do that, we were going to make it possible, then make it
Right.
simple, then make it great, right? So we
Aligns with your values of flexible and powerful. Might not be the easiest thing to learn how to use to begin with, but that's a part too.
Right. And in terms of that, I actually like I simplicity is about what is a function of what you're used to and also what you know how to do, right? So the way I think about it is any creative tool must have enough degrees of freedom for you to do things that don't make sense, right? And so but what you need to know is to learn growth more than you need to learn clay. So we need to not be difficult in how to use clay to do growth, but growth
Right.
itself is hard. And the way that I compare it to, at least internally, is if you're learning how to play the guitar, you don't say, let's make an easier guitar. You say, I need to learn how to play music. And so, in the same way, you should learn how to do growth, and then clay should be easy to execute. You learn how to do design, and then you can use Photoshop. You don't say, Photoshop is hard.
Right, right. Love it. Now, it's 2024. If I don't ask you a question about LLMs, then an angel in heaven will die. So we'll have to go there next. Curious when kind of the team at Clay started prototyping with LLMs first, and how did it impact your company and team vision, given that there was such immediate obvious adjacencies and potential in terms of like the area that you were working in. I think LLMs like help anyone become an ML engineer in some way,
Yeah.
right? So lots of overlap with your vision. Curious like when that happened for Clay and how it impacted your team.
So I think early 2023, we were aware of GPT-3, and the way that the product was built from the beginning was to aggregate every data source and make
Right,
all of these tools available. So it was very easy for us to quickly add it as an API and then start experimenting with it in the product and really see what our customers wanted to build with it. And it was pretty easy for our own team to start to imagine the things that you could do. Well, now you can scrape websites and ask questions about them in a much easier manner than needing an engineer to kind of figure out what the CSS selectors are going to be, right? That change all the time. But you can also summarize someone's work history and use that in an email. So that was pretty obvious pretty quickly. And the question was, how good were the results going to be? And what did we need to do to make it easy to use in the product and to kind of bring those use cases to light? And that was most of the journey of using it. So we were really the thing I think that was more difficult in the past is that at some point you would get stuck. And we built Clay to never get stuck while you're building your go-to-market engine. So if you needed data from one other place, you can get it. So it
right,
was easy to add AI as one more source. And sometimes you would need to ask the way you would qualify something is you say, hey, can you go to their website and see if they have a demo button? Well, no data provider has that information, or that information might change over time. Are they SOC 2 compliant? But with LLMs, you could replicate some of the tasks that people would do at
right.
scale.
So, first of all, congrats on being one of the fastest growing SaaS startups in the go to market tech ecosystem right now. I am curious how you're thinking about your future. Where do you go from here? You started with kind of a much more blank canvas, big vision product, and now you have gotten really good at doing solving some problems. I'm sure you're itching again to think about new problems as well. Curious how you're thinking about the maybe 2 3 year roadmap right now.
Yeah, totally. I think that the best way I actually talk about this a little bit inside the company. I think as companies grow, usually their messaging on their website becomes more and more abstract, right?
Right.
And what we are going to say now and in the future is tools for growth, right? So we translate any idea that you have to grow your business into reality. And the vision here is there are a couple of like use cases that I mentioned before: outbound, inbound, retention, and expansion. So the we started off with outbound, which makes sense because it's everybody needs it. You need third party data to do that. And then we're going to move into more and more things that require, you to have more integrations into the company's kind of data. Right. And so that's kind of like the full picture. In terms of what we're doing next is we're going to be releasing ability to kind of use different signals and intent signals from around the web to trigger these workflows and personalized outreach. That's kind of on the immediate roadmap. And goal is for you to eventually be able to sit in a meeting with another growth team member and kind of ideate and be able to translate that in Clay in minutes.
Right.
That's kind of where we want to get to. So we're going to be releasing signals and intents, and then lots of improvements to how to write messages with AI right after that.
Right. Nice. I am so excited for it. I think a lot of people in the sales ecosystem have been waiting to see tools that make their day to day much more effective and also actually integrate with all of the customer data inside their company. So, really excited for what you and a lot of the other great go to market startups are doing right now. Any advice to founders getting started in 2024 to build the next AI powered X? What would be your advice?
Yeah, I think I wonder. Let me kind of reframe that to the way that I am thinking about it, which is less in advice. It's hard to kind of give advice without context and without knowing what the person's struggling with or figuring out. But maybe more how I've been approaching what our strategy is here, which is why how do you differentiate yourself if everybody else has the same technology
Right.
and access to the same technology? So how does it not become commoditized? So if you're the AI co-pilot for X and everybody else has access to the same LMs and the same
Right.
kind of data, what is going to differentiate you from others? So what is not going to get commoditized, and focus on that? What is the insight that you have? You, I think it's really good to have some insight that isn't necessarily related to the technology, but that the technology then and that was maybe overlooked before, either because it's something that people didn't think was doable. Like I'll give you an example. So if I wanted potentially, I want to know, and I'm sure tons of people are working on this, but every single conversation that our go to market team is chatting with, and every single thing that's been said in Slack about them. How can we roll that up into one report that I would read that actually has all the information that I need? Right. So that's something that I want, is not really doable at that level. There's all kinds of variations of it, but that AI could help with. But then what makes it so that there needs to be some kind of insight that is different than what everybody else is doing in the market that they don't believe in at the moment, that allows you to kind of gain the competitive advantage here.
Right. Awesome. Well, that was extremely well said, Kareem. I love how thoughtful you are about the process of being a founder and the way you are approaching and introspecting. Extremely inspiring. Thank you so much for being on the Startup Field Guide. This was a blast.
Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to the Startup Field Guide with Sandhya, an Unusual Ventures podcast. Stay connected with us by subscribing to the show in your favorite podcast player. If you liked what you heard, please rate our show and help us reach more aspiring founders with lessons on how to find product market fit. Thanks for listening. Until next time.